All right. All right, everyone. It's about 9:30. Go ahead and call our TAC January 14th meeting to order. And I'll go ahead and take roll call. Steve Bicking.
Here.
Mike Von Bergen.
Yes.
Al Schmidt.
Yes.
Mike Warner.
Here.
Jody McCarthy.
Here.
Brian Valesky.
Present.
Bruce Meyer.
Here.
Lori Ryan.
Here.
Let's see, Dan Ziller.
Here.
Scott Hayjack. Here. Spring Duffy.
Here.
Ernest or Joyce, I didn't see them, okay. I wonder, do you want to run up real quick and see if we have Ernest or anyone maybe?
Yeah, I did a search, but I didn't look in the rooms.
Okay. We'll see if we can find him. Darren said he's gonna be late. Brad Andresen.
Here.
And then Tyler and Cody could not make it. All right, so we have a quorum. So we'll go ahead and move into item number 2 on the agenda, minutes approval for our last meeting, December 10th. Do I hear a motion to approve? Moved by Bruce,
I'll second.
second by Jody. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor of approving?
Aye.
All right, the ayes have it. Let's see, there's no public. Okay, we'll go ahead and move into election of officers. I'll just open it up to the group to, we currently had Steve as our chair, Steve Bicking as our chair, and Vince Mosco as our vice chair. So, any nominations, any discussion? Anyone?
I think they're doing a fine job.
So do I take that as a nomination for Steve for the chair? Do you mind, Steve?
So,
Okay, so Steve is chairman, and then we do need a new vice chair.
Name tag. So if you're running a meeting, what's the chairman do?
Well, so the chairman typically will run through that. Steve prefers that I kind of run through the order for him, which certainly if you guys wanted to have a new chairman, if that chairman would prefer to kind of go through everything, that's fine.
I'm just asking.
No, yeah, it was just something that me and Steve kind of talked about where he, wanted to kind of focus on giving more of the feedback, and then I kind of focus on the minutia of leading the meeting and not worried about, having to miss something or anything like that, so. Kind of our agreement. So I guess Jody is nominated Steve for chair, so we can.
Although if somebody else would like to be chair, that's also fine with me. So. if
No
anybody
takers?
wants-
I guess there's no takers, Steve, I'm sorry. Why that's silent? Okay, so let's just have a quick vote to confirm Steve. All in favor for Steve as chairman?
Aye.
Okay. And we need a vice chair.
I don't mind volunteering as long as it's
I
not
wasn't,
too
I just to be
crazy.
clear, I wasn't looking at you like, do it.
Thanks. I nominate
Okay.
Jody.
Well, considering I'm the first one to tell other people, yeah, you're doing awesome. I think I did it on Lake County TAC too, so.
Well, Mike just nominated you, so.
Thanks. Thank you, Mike, for the vote of confidence.
Yep.
All right. Hearing no other discussion, all in favor for Jody as vice chair?
Aye.
All right, there we go. All right, so we have our chair, vice chair. We'll go ahead and move into item number 5 on the agenda. Any members' comments? I'll open the floor if anyone has anything. This is just, I guess, anyone that would like to make a comment on anything or suggest for a future topic or discussion or maybe an issue or, whatever that might be. Kind of this is the space. And yes, Ernest?
Yeah, Storian, last time we met, there was a set of sheets after the potential dates for our upcoming meetings.
Yes.
And within it, there were a couple of points made that actually contradict some of the health department's ordinances. In the fact of a detention basin, a high water mark, it noted no septic will be within 200 feet. I was like, I know it's 50. So I finally, I went back through the ordinances of health, and in their Article 4, sure enough, if it isn't 50 feet.
Body of water.
That's right, body of water, but a detention basin, it said to the high water mark of a detention basin, there's no septic
25.
within 200.
Oh, right, it should be 25.
And I'm like, wait a second, this is wrong. So I contacted Leo and Kristen over at Health, and I said, am I misreading, am I looking at this the wrong way? Because we shouldn't have two ordinances contradicting each other. And so they're looking at it right now, and they're reviewing it. They also looked at, there was some information, because as I read it, I said, I do recall decades ago where there was a dry well installed into a detention basin, and there was a 200-foot mark to that. And they said, yeah, there is that, but it's not to the high water mark of a detention basin. So they're looking at it right now at their department, because I took those copies that we had, I had scratched my marks in it, and so if we can just bring it up at a later meeting
Okay.
to discuss a little bit more.
Do you remember what section? I mean, I guess I can scour and find that. But I
I
don't.
should-
It was the last meeting you mentioned. We had something.
I think it was the last meeting, let's see if I have my notes here, December 10. Yeah. Easier to show than to do. It was the last couple of pages, right here. 9 of 15. Right after, there was the thing about the dates, and I put my
Okay.
question marks. It was these two sheets. And it was here, where I was like, isn't it 50? I just,
This is.
it was after this, I don't know why.
Okay, I know what you're talking. Okay, so this is the infiltration facilities. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and so I was just like, well, we really need to talk about it, but I don't have response back from health. And I was like, that's a contradiction, I know, and I know having spent too many years on the design side, it'd be like, wait a second.
Yeah, it wasn't, so that was actually included because of the BMP section after that we were currently discussing.
Okay,
But actually, Brian also had some comments on that section too, even though I
Sorry.
wasn't targeting. It's okay, even though I wasn't targeting, so we could definitely look at that. And who are you coordinating from health, just so I can?
Kristen and Leo, Mary Beth? Mary Beth
Oh,
Leo?
Yeah, you got it right.
I hope I'm getting it politically correct, I'm sorry.
Well, they've had some turnover. I don't. Those are new. Most of those names are new to me. So.
Yes, but well, they're kind of Jeff Lovato fill-ins,
Right.
and so they're filling some gaps.
Okay.
But they're in the process of looking, I sent them scans of my scratched up notes on the 2 pages,
Okay.
and they're looking at it now.
I'll also take a look through the ordinance, because I have to imagine it's mentioned on the infiltration facility. I wonder if it's referenced anywhere else in the SMO, so I'll just take a look at that.
That I don't know, and the reference to this one, just if you need to see it,
So it's
This
just
is-
the
this one-
separation from water to wells, right?
water to septic.
Septic.
Water to septic, yeah, because it's Appendix B, Table 4 of their Article 4.
Okay.
And it's Kristen Chapman.
Okay.
Chapman.
Yeah, I think she's officially.
Oh,
the
yeah,
replacement
this is
for
their-
Jeff.
That's their sheet.
Okay.
Trying not to get you. And I didn't mean to steal your thunder, Brian, if you were going to
There
bring it
was
up.
no
I
thunder, it
apologize.
was more like a mist.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Noted. Anybody else? All right, with that, okay, so we'll get that on, I'll get that on next month's agenda, Ernest. I'll see what other kind of coordination or they have in health, and I'll bring that up to the group, and I'll try to find in the ordinance any other mentions for setbacks from septic systems so that we don't have that discrepancy and folks wondering which one to follow.
And out of curiosity, there's also a reference to the Class 5 wells, which are not only wells, but also devices that infuse liquid at a higher rate.
Yeah.
And the well relationship. They wanted to look into that one too, because
Okay, the injection wells.
quite frankly, I have to be, the last time I looked at Class 5 wells has to have been at least 15 years ago. And that was because of one sewage treatment plant that was upgrading, and it was a Class 5. And I do the reviews for that over at DOT. And so I had to be re-educated because there's more on that now. And so they wanted to look at the Class 5 in relation to the wells, the water potable wells. And so they're going to get back to me on that too.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, I'm sure there, anytime I introduce a new section, I'm sure there's probably quite a bit that we can find. All right, so I'll go ahead, we'll close members' comments then, and we'll go ahead and move into old business. So this is, let me get to it here on my screen. This is the BMP section that I sent out via email, that I guess as a refresher and just for Scott, Dan's benefit, what we were looking to do here is update this section because, and kind of move in a little bit of a different direction than a lot of other places that focused on a hard line, impervious numbers. If you're over this impervious, you have to do this BMP. We didn't necessarily agree with that method just because you could have an ag field that has a long aggregate drive to a pole building, and maybe it's used for their farming operations, which happens not as often, and so requiring a BMP for something like that didn't make sense just because they're over a certain threshold. So what we wanted to do with this section was turn it more into having the applicant give us a narrative on what it is that they're doing on their property, what are the type of activities that they're doing, and from there we can assess whether or not there's a potential risk for some kind of contaminant or pollutant that could be generated through that activity that we have a concern for. And so that's kind of what this section A is talking about, is, hey, give us a narrative, is there going to be any kind of vehicle traffic, outdoor storage, maybe some agricultural uses, parking, maintenance facility, gas or fuel tank station. So this is just kind of a rough list of some of the more common things that we're going to see. For the agricultural section, we did indicate that for the potential agricultural use, a lot of the times they're already following USDA or other federal or NRCS practices, and so if they're meeting those guidelines, then just provide us some kind of notification or documentation that that's happening, and that practice may not need a BMP at that point. Then the second part of the narrative would be, focusing on the potential pollutants. Is it metals and oils? Is it nutrients? Is it total suspended solids? And then from there, identifying which BMP would be used to help reduce the impact of that potential pollutant. This is an area where the TAC committee, we've discussed potentially, using a restriction, a certain limit, a concentration, something like that. And, the idea of getting there is what we want to get to, but right now we don't have any data, we don't have water quality testing, so this just kind of builds a foundation piece to this. And then from there, we basically are just trying to provide some a table to make it easier on people to kind of follow along and be able to pick and choose. So the last time I presented this, and then for major developments which are greater than 1 acre, we are asking them to take a look and see if infiltrating on-site is a possibility. So, and then recording a maintenance plan for the B&P, all that good stuff essentially. So table 3 we revised. Hey Darren.
Hey.
Table 3 we revised. I
We've got
don't know if you want to pull up a chair there or over here.
That's all sitting in the
All right,
back seat. That's all right.
you're welcome. You're welcome to the side area.
I'll take my seat.
Okay, all right. So this table, where it came from was the B&P database that we discussed previously. So we had I kind of asked you guys to kind of give me some feedback and things like that. So I didn't get any. So what I decided to do was clean this up to just the things that we already have literature for or we already have guidelines for. So, for example, for the potential sources, I took out any mention to like industrial processes because someone brought that up, like what does that mean? I don't really want to get into defining that. But if we have a specific or something that we can add to this table, we can do that. And this table isn't the end-all be-all, this is just kind of a helpful guide. So there still could be someone's doing something that isn't necessarily on this list, doesn't exclude them from having to meet these requirements. So just want to preface some of that cleanup for the treatment options. I basically reduced it to anything that's in the Illinois Urban Manual that's going to have guidelines or the Crystal Lake Watershed Design Manual. So there's nothing in here that isn't already available from that perspective. And again, it doesn't mean that someone couldn't come forward with a potential treatment option. It would just be something that they'd have to produce and basically convince that reviewer that, hey, this is going to work, here's the backup data and information, design elements, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that we added in here was for the parking lots. We decided to basically use a vehicle per day type component. Now, I don't know, that this is something that I wanted the group to discuss amongst everything. I don't know that 10 vehicles is the mark, but essentially, with all of these, with most of these developments and things like that, you're either going to have some kind of potential conditional use permit process or septic design involved, and so there's always some kind of criteria that is asking like how many employees or how many people, and so we could figure out how many vehicles per day that means, and then how many is too much to where we want to add a B&P. So that's the idea behind the 10 vehicles. Again, not saying that that's the target or anything, but that was everything else in here that we've discussed previously is pretty much the same. We did add in this section down here just some additional components related to infiltration design, having the sediment forebay, although it's probably already covered in the infiltration facilities portion. And then dry bottom basins to have a minimum slope of 1.5% just to get that vegetation established. If we don't want those, we could remove those. I just thought those were two that kind of seemed like it's best practice, even though it's not necessarily seen as such. So that was the full update, really, was cleaning up this table to simplify it, and then just adding these kind of clarifiers for infiltration designs and the dry bottom detention basins. And then I did change this to a wet bottom basin. I forget what we called it before, but essentially the main options now are detention basin, wet bottom basin, your vegetated swale and strip, porous pavement, rain garden, bioretention. I think that's pretty much all I had here. So unless we feel like we want to add something or remove something, and again, this 10 vehicle per day component discussion, this is again meant to help any applicant figure out maybe what their potential source of pollutant is, depending on if they are meeting some of these sources, what pollutant to focus on, and then choosing a treatment option that would seem to help reduce that pollutant load.
Question.
Yes,
Um,
okay, I'll go here first.
What is, so when you say exceeding 10 vehicles per day, what are you trying to exclude there, like a private driveway? Is that what you're?
Yeah, or like a smaller business, or, there's some businesses that only have like 4 employees that go out to their site potentially, or, that, the idea is to try to limit the amount of BMPs required. Like, I think, I was keeping kind of what Darren always said, was it Kane County, Darren? I can't remember, where they do it for single-family residences, you might need a BMP.
Oh, DuPage.
DuPage. So I was thinking of that example. So I was trying to kind of move the goalpost a little bit to eliminate, maybe the smaller businesses where they don't have public coming. Maybe it's a delivery a couple times a week, but they have 4 employees or 5 employees type of thing.
What if you gave it a little more leeway instead exceeding an average of 10 vehicles per day?
This is all for developments over 1 acre of or impervious.
No, this would be for any development that,
So we're doing retention ponds already for anything over 1 acre of impervious for the most part, unless you got the 5% rule.
right. So if you're already having to put in a detention basin, then, yeah, you're probably.
Kind of met the requirement
You
of.
probably meet the requirement, right. So this would be like, so the biggest example, we had our planning and development kind of end of the year analysis. One of the biggest conditional use requests that we have are landscaping businesses. So a lot of the times those might be existing, or they're converting prior impervious area to now storage area, and now you're potentially talking about it being on a former single-family residence or ag that's gonna have a lot of public coming in. So they might not be triggering detention requirements because maybe their impervious is pre-2004, but now that's a complete change to how the land was used before. Now you're gonna have potentially a lot of exposed material coming in. You could have a lot of deliveries, traffic. It just depends on their own operations. But, that's one example that we do get a lot of information about. And so I don't know how, when you're talking about the impervious area aspect to this, it feels like doing it on how many people are gonna be there and what the operations are is a better way, because like I said, for a lot of those, they're either coming in for a conditional use permit, and it's required as part of their applications to indicate how many employees, how many people they think are gonna be visiting, and usually as part of any septic operations or well, confirming that the existing facilities has adequate capacity for that type of traffic, or from like a access, ADA compliance from a building perspective. Do they need now handicap or ADA parking and an accessible bathroom? And so all of that gets factored in, so it's information that we have. And it feels like a place that's getting more traffic is probably gonna be at a higher risk of higher pollutant load potentially to the area. Whereas if you had that same operation, maybe they're not really having it open to customers. Maybe it's just, their workers coming in, so they have 4 workers, and then they're leaving with the vehicles. But maybe they have an open storage area of material that's coming in. We don't really know what's in that material, so maybe we focus on the material aspect, and they don't have to worry about as much for the vehicles and the metals and oils, depending on those operations.
To Dan's point, and this is something I was thinking about, because just driving home from a meeting last night, passing by the SWCD office. I don't know if you were doing Boy Scouts there last night, but
Yeah, it would have been Boy Scouts, yeah.
you had a lot of cars in the parking lot. But 95% of the time you pass by, there's nobody there, or 1 or 2 vehicles. And so that would be a case in point where if you're doing an average, it's a fairer representation of the amount of vehicles that are commonly there. Seasonal use would be the other thing. So if you've got an operation where, pumpkin operation, where you're going to have a bunch of cars during a short period of time, but the rest of the year it'll be, a gravel drive or something like that. Is that what you had in mind? I'm just kind
Yeah.
of curious.
No, I think,
And then how could we?
average is, I think, that's the idea. And so, and to that extent, that's why in those applications, that's where the applicant would have to tell us like, oh, I expect, 5 to 10 customers per day, and I have 3 workers coming in every day. So on average, they would be higher than the 10 vehicle. Now, we can go to 15 vehicles too. I don't know kind
I
of
don't know
what
how you
the,
put a number on that, just as you said average, and we're giving them a little leeway.
As long as it's not overcomplicating the review process, it seems like that,
yeah, it's a number that usually, from what I've seen on a lot of applications, that people should be able to estimate kind of what their workers are and anticipate kind of how many people are coming in and out type of thing.
So as I drive in from Rockford every day, I see at least 4 businesses between landscaping and siding people, gutter people, and they've got well over 10 cars in their 1 acre, 2 acre parcel. The 10 doesn't come even close, I think, to some of these small businesses or whatever, they're good sized landscape businesses, but they're working out of their house or they rented a house and, if anybody that's been driving around the county, you can see them, they're wide open. I mean,
Sure.
do they have a permit? Some of these probably don't.
Well,
Guessing.
if they're running landscape business, they usually need a conditional use. And so to that point, if it's, again, I think it's something where if they're coming in and dropping off and leaving, then we can take that into account. Because for health requirements, that's something that they want to understand, like, are people kind of sticking around?
So I think that the count is kind of something to be careful about, because some will say, oh yeah, we're under 10. They'll drive by after we're open, you'll see how many cars are there on a daily basis.
Which again, it's
And so
okay.
it's fine on the bigger parcels, but, most of these guys don't have 5 acres, or they definitely don't have 10 acres.
That's why I want to put something that makes sense to kind of start, and we can
Right.
obviously, like, this is just kind of our foundational component. So we
Mhm.
definitely want to capture like the retail guys, right, coming in and it's a strip mall or something like that. But we want to be mindful of our smaller businesses. So like I said, I don't know if 10, maybe 20 is better, or 15. From that perspective, Darren, sorry.
Does that correlate to the number of parking spaces they need to have? Because that's in Lake County, their ordinance, they base it on number of parking spaces. And that's very easy as both an applicant and as the reviewer to say, okay, this extra measure is or is not required, because I can literally count on the plan how many striped parking spaces you have. If we start talking about, cars per day or vehicles per day, as a reviewer, it's more difficult for me to, that's a grayer area, a little more difficult for me to make a call on.
I think you're gonna get a lot of people saying that nobody's gonna be there, so they don't have to meet this. I would agree, it's easier to measure that, plus the thing is if the business
That's
changes,
what I was just thinking.
then all of a sudden the new business, they might attract a lot more people, and you're really trying to, the 25 spaces in the WD was a measurement of a size, and I can't remember what that equaled, but, we actually came up with, okay, it's got 25 spaces and it's got this turning lane, so therefore the parking lot's gonna be half acre or something like that. And and you said anything over that, you gotta provide a BMP for.
That's
Well,
a
and-
real good point.
Well, I just want to say to your point, Darren, you as the designer, this might not necessarily be coming from you, right? Because the applicant should kind of be able to ascertain as to what they expect for their business, to then be able to, because if you do have one of these situations, let's say you need a septic system, how do you size the septic? It's going to be based on the number of people that you expect to be there, so you could reasonably figure out, well, if that's 8 people, and we consider 1 car per person potentially, then that's 8 vehicles, was kind of the thought process, is that the information should be available, and we're not necessarily looking to the engineers to answer this component, it probably coming from that individual owner that wants to open that business. And
Part of that's coming through like the
Zoning
planning,
process.
the
Zoning
planning side
process,
of it.
right.
So what you're talking about is like the planning side when they go in for special uses, and you know, many of us are review consultants for communities, and we're doing our stormwater review separate from that. And so what this would then require is for the review consultants to then be further involved in the planning process, or at least, I mean, correspond with whatever municipality and make sure that that's part of the information that comes in the stormwater package.
That's fair, I guess, from the county's perspective. You know, I'm involved with those, providing any kind of feedback or comments to that applicant before they, or during their conditional use application. So a lot of that is coming forward. I know that's information they ask, but yeah, I guess if a municipality isn't involving their consultant at that step, then, like, for me, I'll just give you our process. When it comes in, I'm not necessarily looking for detention to be designed. I just indicated, based on your site plan, you might be triggering detention. Just be aware of that. I don't want them to hire someone, design the detention just to get their conditional use denied, and they wasted money. And so it's more of a FYI, you might have to meet X, Y, and Z requirements. Even though you get your conditional use, you're gonna need a permit. So, I mean, from that perspective, as long as that information is given to you and they're providing it, I feel like we should be able to still ascertain as to, you know, put a vehicle number on it, as opposed to, but I was thinking to the parking space thing, it's, if you're gonna do 20 parking spaces, why not just call it 20 cars?
Right.
And I have seen plans where it's driveways and there's no real parking spaces defined, and they're having multiple deliveries on top of that. So that's why I was trying to get away from a pure parking space count number.
I think you may also want to avoid parking space, although all legitimate statements. There's going to be a wild card, and it's coming up. Unfortunately, DOT is right now having to deal with it and fighting on it. U.S. Fish and Wildlife is picking up properties for the Hackmatech, and they're dropping little itty bitty parking clusters. There's one right now off of 47. As far as I'm concerned, the clumsiest parking I've ever seen. Not only the access, the tightness, the whole thing is off. But they're about to do one on Tryon Grove Road on the northeast corner. And they have to gain access off of Tryon Grove. Well, as we're looking at it, it's a 26-car parking space. And they're not, every time we bring up, okay, you have to give us right of way, we're arguing on that, because it's a change of use, ag field to parking. They don't want to do that. When we looked and said, well, where's your stormwater? We don't have to abide by that rule. I said, what the hell? Why don't you have to abide by the same rule? Well, we're the feds. You know, we're the federalists. We don't need no badges. So that's all we're getting out of them. And then
Been there.
and then I turned around and I go, oh yeah, we're doing one of these up on 173. And I was like, how many parking spaces? 26 parkings. So if you put it to some number like that, those things start popping in as little postage stamps.
Yeah.
You're gonna get people going, well, they don't have to, why do I? They got 26 shown, they didn't have to do any. So I don't know that I'd go with that, only because of what I see coming down the pike with that Hackmatech stuff. Just
Well, and I mean, to your point, that may be hard to also pin an average on, right?
Exactly.
So we're not gonna find something that's ideal here. I think we just wanna try to capture the majority of some of these so that we have protections in place. And again, because we're going with this change of, you know, everything to this point, at least that I've seen, has been like a straight threshold. You go over this threshold, you provide. You go over this threshold, you provide it. We're going a little bit different direction here, where it's more based on narrative and the applicant having the ability to say, well, I don't think I need this, and here's why. And I think that tends to work, that probably work better with any applicant in general, to give them that ability. And I don't, you know, I don't know how some of this is going to work, and we might, that's why I'm saying this is the foundational piece, and I think we need to consider this is probably good enough moving forward that we're capturing the majority of what we want to capture and build off of that. You know, just not to get too ahead of ourselves, but we are moving forward with our watershed planning, where we are hoping to get water quality data flooding data, et cetera, a lot of this information that's gonna help feed into this to see how the county is doing. To help figure out if we need to crack down on something more vigorously than just kind of what we have here. So I think, I'm not as concerned as getting it 100% right, but I wanted to Al's point, I do want to find a decent sweet spot where we're not being too critical on smaller owners and businesses and, have enough to get the rest. And there's probably going to be some gray areas in there that we're going to encounter. That's without a question, that there's always going to be one where we're going back and forth. I don't think I meet it, and we'll have to learn from that, and we might lose a couple of those.
Why even put a number to it? Because in the end, this spot is gravel or blacktop or concrete. You're measuring impervious as a site designer in the end.
Because I'm thinking about some of those ag areas that I've seen where the farmer needs a pole building and a driveway, and it could be 8,000 square feet or something because it has to go in the back. And they're just gonna be using it for, some storage in their tractor, and really that thing comes out during those initial and growing season times and whatever, or, then maybe do some maintenance, whatever type of thing. And how do I exclude that, knowing that potentially, like, what is the B&P concern there? Is there?
Like gravel areas are gravel for years and they get covered with just natural infiltration of grasses, and now it's not
Right, but so
covered
that,
as impervious anymore.
but that's what I mean, like, for that area, if that person is just using their vehicle, I don't even know, maybe at the height, maybe it's a few times a week, and a tractor comes out. Is that really a pollutant source that we want to say, you need a B&P? So I want to try to, from that perspective, eliminate some of those if we can, because that's not as high of a concern.
Mhm.
And is that being too restrictive on that person to treat him like a retail store? That's essentially what's happening. Is you go, I don't remember, Darren DuPage is what, 5,000 square feet?
For PCBMPs?
Yeah.
2,500.
So there you go. So 2,500, it's essentially also triggering single-family homes sometimes for larger ones. So the idea is to not, that's why we don't want to do an impervious target, and instead put it more towards, well, what are you using that 10,000 square feet of impervious for? Well, for my agricultural practices, I've got a tractor, whatever, I don't know.
Well, in the same essence, I'm just looking at 10 spaces, 200 square feet per space, has 2,000 for those parking spaces, and you probably got another 2,000. You're up to 4,000 because you have to drive and the parking.
Sure.
Again, I go back to the square footage, and what's that square footage compare to the ordinance right now? I even pin it to a parking space number.
Well, I'm not saying that we're trying to pin it to a parking space number, but I guess the drawback here is if we just put potential source parking lots, roadways, driveways, what threshold is the person using to know that they're gonna need a B&P? So that's
This is my thought. I think I'm going to sleep to the area, and the engineer's going to say, all right, till we meet the impervious requirements.
Then I think we'd have to put some protections for the farmers in the ag community that they're gonna be over 4,000, or just someone that, hey, I want a detached garage for something that's happened for my classic cars, and it's a 6,000 square foot building stemming off their existing driveway. That's a fixed roof. The potential source of pollutant for a fixed roof should be relatively small. So to Darren's point, that could be a single-family residence project that you even do. That now you're over that 2,000 square feet with a larger home, detached garage, additional pole barn, and their subdivision design allows for that much impervious, but now we're coming in and saying, hey, you need an additional B&P. When, again, the pollutant source might not warrant a B&P in that situation. So that's why we were kind of thinking, okay, if we look at the number of people that are going there, then that's a more busy area. that might be a better route to go.
My only concern is that, like, I recently had this actually with methadone clinic, where there was a lot of arguing back and forth about how many vehicles there would be per day. And it got to a point where we're like, fine, prove it out with a traffic study. So that is going down a road where it's really onerous and expensive for the applicant. Whereas to your point, in the zoning code, it's really defined like this many parking spaces per this square footage based on usage, and then it's very defined, whereas I think vehicles per day is really squishy, and there's a lot of arguments to be had.
You can put in like a huge parking lot and then argue, oh, I'm only gonna have 6 vehicles per day, but zoning maybe put in a huge parking lot, but
Right.
I've got I don't know what you would have that would have a big parking lot, but,
Wedding facility,
yeah.
do a lot of them.
So I understand this like for the smaller parcels, but I'm thinking like those medium-sized, kind of bigger parcels that are gonna use this as a way to try to skirt around the ordinance, and not have to, come back and say, well, trust us, it's only gonna be 10 per day. And we know in reality it's not.
Well, like I said, I don't think we can avoid those conversations. You're always gonna have someone that's gonna come in and argue, and I think, for any of the engineers that are reviewers, pushing back and saying, well, it's a 50-space parking lot, I think is more than reasonable, with that person. And I often tell people, if you don't like that interpretation, the ordinance gives the ability for that applicant to air their grievances and say, hey, I think the enforcement officer doesn't have this right and this requirement should be dropped. So we do have a mechanism for that. And I think, like I said, let's say that's 10%. If we cover 90%, that's probably pretty good. I just don't see, again, with all of this, I don't see a way that we can actually make this easy for everyone, and some people are just gonna make it difficult anyway, because that's just what they're gonna try to do.
So we really got off in the weeds there on a pretty simple question, but basically where.
That can't happen
where
here, Dan.
I was with Scott, I'm thinking of, the kids that are selling sweet corn, got a sweet corn stand or a pumpkin stand, trying to make some money so they can got a college fund. And then somebody says, them people got 15 or 20 cars going through their driveway every day. Well, that happened for 3 weeks. The rest of the year, nothing was going on there.
Right.
That's kind of why I was.
No, and I agree, and I think that's why we need to use the average. I think the average makes sense, and like I said, a lot of this goes into, a lot of times, into zoning, and health are asking those questions regardless.
Is this average per year? Like average per, for the whole year?
I don't know, I think that's.
How do you develop an average? How do you develop an average?
Traffic study.
I think it's per day. I think they usually do an average per day so that they understand,
I
like,
know.
if it's a septic facility, how many people are you gonna be having use that facility?
I get per day, but I meant, what's the time frame? How many days do you study? Does Ernie, for traffic study, anybody familiar with that to know?
Well, when we have a traffic study submitted to us, because like if we have an entrance requested of us,
Yeah.
it's not against us to say, hey, we need a traffic study.
Yeah.
However, we always critique the study, because as an example, I think everybody's pretty much familiar with that workforce housing going in at Johnsburg and 31. Well, the first study they submitted to us was taken on June 20th. We're like, whoa, foul. They had study, no school buses, no parents dropping kids. This is a garbage study. And we came to find out, yeah, they ordered it in April, and the consultant said, well, let's hold it off till June when the school buses and traffic's gone. So I mean, you can cookbook chemistry, everything. I mean, as long as you know the answer you want, you can backtrack and make the problem come out. So the problem with any traffic study is it's customarily instantaneous on that day, and then you reach for numbers either 2030 or 2050 from some source, providing it usually CMAP, and then you forecast numbers in. So it's still, even a traffic study can be warped, and they are many times. So
No, and we don't want to overcomplicate the compliance aspect of things.
Yes.
But to Michael's point, you know, I had kind of a vision in my head when I was talking about the SWCD, but you did bring up a good point. You know, we're addressing this business at this time. If it changes hands and goes to a different business, you know, that's not going to be captured necessarily.
It's not, no.
And so, you know, unfortunately, I think we do have to look at things more, you know, from a more remote level as opposed to looking at this specific activity.
Well, I don't know.
What happens if the
Yeah.
property carries a conditional use? And then the conditional use comes up for review in the 10 years or 20? And then things have changed on the property. I'm just saying, like Al brought up with the wedding venues. Those
Right.
are really sketchy on the amount of people and the cars that are on the properties, and they're way too small, some of these, for having, you know, 100 cars on them, and they're 2 acres.
It's certainly one way that we would know that change in use is through that conditional use permit if it's required. But yeah, there could be some developments that start off as small and then we simply can't go back and say, oh, you need a B&P now if they don't trigger any
I mean, that's a
requirement.
perfect example, the Blue Stem Farm on Lang Road, 173.
Yeah.
Is it 2 acres, even that? It doesn't matter, there's only parking there
Yeah.
and gravel and concrete for 20, then that's all grass parking after that. So
Well-
if you put it to a number, you're gonna get people saying, well, like, I gotta get a conditional use. We got conditional use to do
But
grass
that's-
parking to
but-
stay in the impervious threshold of the county.
But that would be a preference then because they're using more green infrastructure, right? So that's the idea behind this is we're not
I'm just saying,
saying.
don't tie
we
it to a
need
space, don't, just let the merits be up on the square footages that are in the ordinance already.
Well, the ordinance doesn't have a square footage for this, for the B&P trigger. We don't have anything, right? So we could go to a square footage number, but it kind of defeats the whole purpose of the narrative. From that perspective, if, you know, we would be more than happy if someone says, if someone knows that there are less than X vehicles or something and says, you know what, let me put a green parking lot with green infrastructure and vegetation. Then that's the whole idea is, okay, you're actually doing a
Improving
change
things.
in design that's improving it. Now we're less concerned because we have essentially it's baked in B&P to your parking area, right? And so you're triggering that condition of, well, I've got more than 10 vehicles coming per day, and so I'm going to modify my design, and now you potentially also eliminate the need for a detention basin on top of that. This is kind of what this is also hoping to facilitate, is maybe allow people to think about their designs a little bit differently on top of that, but yeah.
I'm sorry. It's
Okay.
gonna cause a
Pile it on.
a lot of backpedaling.
I don't, it's just to be clear, we do have other things, so at about 10:30, at about 10:30, I think we need to figure out where we're at and think
Well,
about.
maybe it's better I just keep my mouth shut.
No, I just, I
Why
want to be,
why are we afraid of the numeric threshold?
the square footage.
However you want to state it, but I'm just saying,
Well,
why are we afraid of the numeric threshold?
Well, I would say, why are we afraid
Trigger,
of the
whatever you
vehicle
wanna
per
call it.
day? Why are we afraid of the vehicle per day?
Because the numbers can be manufactured, just like.
Yeah.
It's too much guesswork, and I'm really just,
Right.
I'm
And
to,
they're expensive to
all these
construct.
EOs out there. This is my problem with the Lake County, it's any EO thing. There's too much interpretation that's required. And I go to community A, I can do one thing, I can go to community B, I can do another thing. And you know what, in the private side, some people like that. I don't like the guesswork, because then I gotta go to project manager. First of all, I don't do much of that anymore, but I have to go to project manager and explain why in community A I can do it this way, and then I go to community B, I get my hand slapped if I try to do that, and I get all kinds of egg on my face.
But
You've been there, you know exactly what I'm
Well, I
talking
know, but if someone says, hey, 15 vehicles per day average, I feel like that's something that you can figure out.
I would
put
rather have it
together.
be tied to a land use.
Oh, well, so again, for the TAC, all of you guys are part of it. I don't know, maybe what we want to do is see what the preference of the room is and drive the discussion in that direction. I'm not, I'm not sure what makes sense here, because should we do that? I guess, just real quick, show of hands.
Average, gives them a little bit of wiggle room, not
Right,
this much.
but my point being, would most members prefer a impervious threshold? Or would most members prefer to do something different, more along the lines of trying to analyze how much, activity is on that site through, again, I don't know how else you would do that, except just saying, I've got X employees, that's X number of cars per day, and X patrons, et cetera.
Isn't the point of this to avoid, at the early stage, hiring an engineer to go through and do all the calculations and measure the impervious and all of that? Why not separate parking lots from roadways? Parking lots you could figure out and say, okay, 25 spaces, you need the BMP. Roadways with so many cars going on it, like with the corn and, sales, that's a number, and that would be easier to calculate.
We can certainly do that, but I think to Brian's point, he doesn't want to have the vehicle per day component. He'd rather just go to a straight square footage area, which at that point, that's what we can go to for parking lots and driveways. Instead, so it could read parking lots and driveways with a surface area greater than X, for example. If that is more.
Can you just do that with an ag exemption?
Yeah, I think if we want to go to a square footage number, I think we'd have to think about exempting single-family residences and some of those things, but I feel like the list of exemptions then grows. Well, if you're doing this, then that, and this, and that, and this, and that, and are we complicating it even further? It's like, oh, great, there's a number, but now I have 10 exemptions. I don't know, 8 exemptions. I don't know what that looks like. 10
It'd be 10, easily 10.
Okay.
I can think of 10, just sitting here, so I can think 10 like that.
Right, so that, I guess this is the crossroads, and like I said, I don't know, maybe we just want to think about it more or whatever. I'm leaving it to you guys, providing that feedback. We as staff want to take all the feedback and then come back to you guys on, do we look at something else? Do we look at whatever? I can take this, we've got MCSC, next week? I can take it to MCSC potentially to say, hey, I've got my TAC at a crossroads on this particular issue. What do you guys want to see? We've done that before, right?
Brian, could you elaborate on one thing? Stoyan was making a point that part of this is to incentivize good design. There are other options out there, and having it set up a certain way can incentivize good design. If we go to a square foot mechanism, can it be worded to provide that incentivization for good design?
I don't know, there's a
Does that
shortage of
then
good
address
design
both
out there when it
concerns?
comes to BMPs, that's all I'll say. There's just no matter how, the narrative, I think, gives you the ability to put a lot of words and make a word salad and put it in a report and just write it up. And at the end of the day, it may not actually amount to anything, I guess is what I'm saying. But if there's, a numeric threshold, then there's typically a size of a facility that equates to, and that's based on some calculation that exists somewhere. You can't make that up. I mean, you can make it up, but that's the part that the EO has to check and verify and live with. I'm a modeler, I'm sorry, I live in that space, and that's the reason I choose to do that way, because I can check a volume against another volume. That takes some guesswork out of it.
since you said you may want to just take it to SMC.
Well, it's an idea to
Do
the
you-
group.
Do you want to do your quote-unquote vote? Just so that you take it there with some opinion? Or do you want to take it back with,
If you
they
guys
were
are-
totally indecisive and nobody knew?
I would like to know which way the group is leaning. It would be helpful, I think to everyone it would be helpful, right? If, at the end of the day, I mean, whatever we put together, we voted out of here, right? Because this is what the TAC for, you know, if, that's the whole idea behind these things, the majority gets the final vote. And so if it looks like this, you guys are gonna vote anyway, and if you're split, or if you're already leaning one way, then we shift focus and we start looking at what's the right threshold number, what are the exemptions, and et cetera, and not lose time on the way that it is currently. Darren, go ahead.
My vote is for 25 parking spaces.
Okay. So, so yours is maybe a little bit of a hybrid then. It's not necessarily an impervious number, it's actually related to parking spaces.
Right, because that's what we're talking about is something that generates pollutants. A gazebo roof or something would generate pollutants. I think we're talking about parking spaces.
Okay.
That's why number of parking spaces.
Not parking, it's vehicle traffic. It's
So-
not parking spaces.
Are we talking about all BMPs, or, because that trigger in the WDO is hydrocarbon, which is a really specific.
Yeah, so example, like development comes in and they're saying, I'm gonna have impervious area for vehicle traffic, parking spaces, whatever it happens to be. Do we want, so from that perspective, and whatever it is, all categories.
There you go.
Do you wanna move to have it trigger a BMP at a specific size? So we're talking about area, vehicle traffic, or some kind of other designation of how many cars can it fit parking space number? That's the question, I guess. I'm capturing impervious area related to surfaces that are being driven on. Anybody else want to comment? Otherwise, I'm just going
No.
to take the room as being split based on.
So this is just for small or minor developments,
It could be for anything, so major.
but the
developments.
major development is on the next page, and that says,
You're not
that's a separate
capturing
list.
BMP, it's
Yeah,
going
because
straight
at
into
that
grade.
point, you're triggering stormwater detention, and we want you to look at infiltration. So yeah, this would probably be more for your minor and intermediate
Right.
developments.
So what are those triggers right now, minor? Because I think a 25 stall parking space is gonna be in the major category, isn't it?
About 8,000 square feet.
It could be.
How many square feet, Alan?
About 8,000 square foot.
But
So you're
just
still
for the
down below
park-
the 20,000 threshold that the county has in place.
So you might not be triggering detention.
but you're gonna- but you're
That
gonna
8,000 is
need-
just the parking lot though, right, Al?
but you're
Parking
gonna
lot.
get in
So
there.
I'll give you guys an example.
Drive to it.
We have a conditional use permit where they want to change it to a landscape facility, and they do want to generate roughly an 8,000 square foot parking area at the back of the house. That's going to be primarily the main impervious change. So that potentially might be a minor, maybe an intermediate, depending on some of the other grading components that go along with making some of those changes. But that's a type of project that we could be looking at where now you do have a single-family residence that's turned into a pseudo facility for landscaping, but doesn't quite trigger a major development, criteria, doesn't quite trigger detention.
It's all about what their existing impervious is before you add that 8 to 10,000 square
Right,
feet.
and their existing impervious
When they get over the,
could be set up in a way that they just have to repave, and now they're gonna use that for parking, and then there's, maybe adding an additional 2,000 to help with vehicle turnaround or whatever. So before it was, I don't have anything specific, I'm sure I can find something, but they had enough impervious to now they can produce maybe not 25 parking spaces, maybe it's 20 out of their existing impervious area that's grandfathered in.
So, so just to clarify, the choices are vehicles, average vehicles per day, or surface impervious surface area calculations,
Or I guess Darren's is a little bit of a hybrid where he's
Number
going
of
to a
parking spaces.
number of parking spaces.
Number of parking
So that
spaces.
kind of, I guess,
so I'd like to call for a vote, please.
Or you just leave it alone.
I make a
Just leave it
motion to
alone
call
the way
for a
you got it
vote.
right now.
well, but Dan, the thing is, we don't have anything right now, so what we're indicating is that this is a potential source, and you might need a BMP, so we're trying to.
But you do have, you've said 10 vehicles. You can either.
Oh, you're saying how you like, okay, so you like the 10 people, okay, so Mike wants to vote on the 3 options, Mike?
Yeah, I move to call for a
Okay.
vote. I think it needs a second, though.
Let me,
Second that.
Yeah.
okay, let me get a list together, okay. So we'll call option 1 to keep it to a vehicle per day average. Whether it's the 10, 15, okay. The second option is having a square footage of impervious area.
And do we have that defined? What do we think that would be?
I think you'd have to do that second, then after.
Well, I think we probably want to make sure that the majority falls in that line and then figure out is it 5,000, 10,000, or whatever, okay? And then 3 is a little bit of the hybrid where it would be parking stalls. Okay, all right. So I'll go ahead and just write names down as I see them. Do a little bit.
So just to clarify, so this is new impervious area, or this is just impervious area? Because the impervious area calculation, if we're gonna just say it's net new impervious area, that's different than a change in land use that's gonna generate 25 parking spaces, because you're saying some area is gonna be repurposed for parking.
Yeah.
So I
well,
kind of like the
so-
parking space issue, if that's going to capture the repurposement of the property, and that's what we're trying to do.
I guess all of this would be, if the development does not need a stormwater permit, it's a not regulated development, then really they're exempt from all SML requirements.
Right.
So I should specify that. So let's say though, to the one we were discussing, if they do trigger a stormwater permit because of just regrading work or something along those lines, they're over the 5,000 square foot threshold and they need a stormwater permit. And as part of that though, we know that they're repurposing the whole parking lot and now are going to, bring in more customers. I think the square footage of impervious area, the way that the ordinance is written, would fall under new impervious area. So I don't think we would be able to capture that under this. If we go to a square footage number, I think it would have to be new impervious post 2004. You would not be able to capture any repurposing with option 2, which is the square footage impervious area.
Okay.
Right, I think
That's
that's
what
what you're
that's what
saying,
I
right?
think, right.
Yeah, so I guess that's an important distinction, maybe I'll just go around the room and everybody can tell me what option they prefer. If we go to a square footage of impervious area, you would not be able to say this existing, let's say it's ag and it was just a barn and whatever, and now it's turning into a wedding facility. And they're repurposing all of that. And maybe there's some grading, so it still needs a stormwater permit, but they're not necessarily creating enough new square footage of impervious area to trigger a potential BMP. That option will not cover that, whereas the other 2 potentially would.
But with the wedding venue, they would have most likely a quantifiable number of parking spots.
Right, so that's what I'm
Right.
saying with the other option then, to Darren's point, yeah, you guys are not, you needed a permit and now you're having more than 25 spots. Or you're triggering a stormwater permit and you're gonna have more than 10 vehicles per day average, or 15, or whatever that number is. Those 2 would capture requiring a BMP in that case. Whereas the square footage number would only apply to new, they might not be triggering that depending on the number that we come up with.
And that's why I was saying before, I think that if you separated out parking lots of a certain number and roadways with a certain vehicle traffic, you'll capture everything, because in the case of a wedding venue, they're gonna have a parking lot, but what if they turn that into a farmer's market where they just had people just driving through more frequently? You're gonna have a lot more vehicle traffic, but maybe not as many people parking.
Okay.
So I was thinking maybe you'd have option 4, which would be a combination.
Story, just put one option down for every person present, and we'll all vote, okay? We'll have it covered, we'll all be there.
All right, let's, yeah, I guess, yeah, we can do that. I'll just go around the room, you can tell me what your preference is. I'll try to put you in a category. If you don't fit one, I'll give you your own. And then we can go from there. All right. Option, okay, so you like the square footage. All right, Steve?
Parking spaces, 25.
Okay, I'll clarify 25. Darren, I know you're in that boat, so I'll just put you down. Scott?
I would do parking 25, vehicles 10.
Okay. So put you in the combination. Who's next? Brad?
I like the split combination.
The split
Yeah.
okay, all right, it's growing on you, huh? Lori?
Parking spaces.
Just parking spaces? Okay.
Average.
Average, all right.
The vehicle per day.
All right.
You like your traffic studies.
If you go back to the square footage, Al deferred to him. That would tie into more of the ordinance then,
Right.
the 5,000 square foot trigger. Something like that sort of thing. I would.
Would you guys like to have a number for that, just for this?
Well, if it aligns with the ordinance that's already in effect now, it seems like that would be
Well,
similar.
the 5,000 square foot trigger is not necessarily for impervious, that's just
Permit.
improvements to the land if you're doing berming, or you wanna, your land is on the slope and you wanna flatten it.
I go back to the wedding venue that put in an impervious green parking lot, and then 2 years later, they paved it over now, and then no retention.
Well, so as part of this, again,
So how much
your
does that-
your BMPs, they're recording those as part of the requirement. So it's like a detention design. If you're out there and you have a detention base and all of a sudden you fill it in because you just feel like it, you're gonna get a violation for that. Now, we have to catch you, obviously, but that's something that we can go back on and say, okay, you were impervious grass and had the modifications, now you've changed it to impervious, you could also be triggering detention and everything. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the square footage is, just because it's not in there doesn't mean that we wouldn't come back and say, you agreed to have this BMP, this grass parking lot area that was recorded as part of your stormwater detention and part of your requirements for your stormwater permit. Those are long-term commitments for maintenance as well.
Yeah, so
So you have to be maintaining those BMPs. If you're not maintaining those BMPs, our idea is to say, hey, and that's something that I want to discuss with the group for future reference, is for proper maintenance, we want to develop some kind of list that applicant turns into us on a yearly basis. If he's not following through, then we can issue him a violation. That's how it can come up, that, hey, you're no longer holding your end of the bargain for this particular BMP because you've now changed it to concrete or asphalt.
So, in your instance of the wedding venue comes in 25 parking spaces or more, when their BMP is gonna be grass, and then they pave it, well, then they violated this. But it's gonna be triggered by the 25 parking spaces. So, and then they're gonna come back with their BMP as a grass parking lot. So
And it
it's
doesn't make a
recorded.
difference if
Or
it's
infiltration
more
trench or
paved
swale or-
places, if it's
If
40.
it's 50 or 60, yeah, it doesn't, whatever, 25 would trigger it, and if they set their BMP as grass, then they need to hold themselves to that,
Or
for
maybe a
perpetuity.
porous pavement or something.
Or whatever it is.
Impermeable pavers, and they
But
come
they're
back and
committing
it's
to
all
the
asphalt.
BMP, right?
It would be no different than someone filling in their detention basin, same idea. We'd have to catch them.
And how many what's a square foot in a parking space?
200.
You say
200,
200.
10 by 20, or 10 by
200.
20. Yeah. Plus they have to park the stall, so whatever, you got another 300 per stall.
I'd go with the square footage.
Okay.
Option 1.
Okay.
I like their hybrid with the parking stalls and then, or like count per day, but I think 25 stalls is too much.
All right, well, we'll just, we'll put you down in the hybrid for now, so. Brian?
Threshold, square footage.
All right. Mike?
I like the hybrid. I agree with Jody. I think 25, maybe too many though.
Okay. Spring?
Hybrid.
All right. Did we miss anyone? Did we get everyone? All right, so essentially, I think kind of parsing through this, the square footage only got 3 of you. So I think it's probably fair to say we can move away from the square footage. So, and then what I see the next is a mix of vehicles per day, the parking stalls, and then a combination of the two. So I think the discussion that we probably want to have is if we want to do a combination and what that parking stall number is, to Jody's point, and Mike have already indicated 25 feels too much to them.
What's the count? What's the vote count?
Well, I've got Dan, Ernest, and Bruce that prefer to just keep it vehicle per day average, and then Steve, Darren, and Lori that want to just do parking stalls, and then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Scott, Brad, Jody, Mike, and Spring that like a merging of the two. So I don't see a downside to a merging of the two, I guess. I don't know if anybody else has any comment, or kind of, I guess I'll throw it to Steve, Darren, Lori, Dan, Ernest, and Bruce. Do you mind that we have that vehicle average per day and a parking lot total?
I don't mind for this reason. You were trying to approach the ag or the hobbyist who has his classic car or whatever. Well, he's not gonna have any parking spaces anyway.
That's what I was thinking.
I mean, what's he gonna have? And no farmer's gonna have a parking, I mean, they're gonna park their pickup truck on the drive, go into the building and come out.
Got a different
So-
spot every day.
Yeah, so in my mind, I don't see it as a problem for the oddballs that we're trying to handle. Let's do it that way, it's fine, but
Okay.
they won't have any parking, that's all.
All right, so
Oh,
So then how we can break this out is we can have parking lots and have a above X number. And we can say driveways, roadways and roadway/driveways, or just driveways, roadway driveways,
Roadway driveway.
roadway driveways. Roadway driveways with the X vehicle average per day. Everyone's quiet all of a sudden. I don't know if that's a good thing.
With like an or, so it's either or.
Yeah, probably, right? Either
Yeah.
or, yeah. Because you trigger one, you're required to do it, so it's one or the other. It doesn't have to be both. If it's both, you're already needing it on one.
Needed.
Yeah, I'll list it as 2 separate bullet points. So that way, they're just kind of their own thing. So if you meet one, okay. All right, so with the time left, can we agree on a average vehicle and a parking stall number, or should we bring that back for further discussion? Or next tag? I don't know if you guys have any other comments on this, so I'm thinking, why don't we table it? We've made some headway. I'll make the changes. I'll leave the 10 and I'll put the 25, and then I'll bring that back, and because we really focused on just that one component, unless you guys don't have comments on anything else.
I-
That's
I-
great.
I have a question, and I'm almost afraid to ask now.
I'm just trying to move it along for you guys, because I appreciate all your voluntary time, but we can take as long as.
This Crystal Lake watershed manual that you're referring to up here in the top,
Yeah.
does that have an effect on the whole county, or just areas that are over there in that watershed?
For now, it's just that watershed area, but we do reference it for infiltration practices, because they have a pretty good guideline for if you're gonna do infiltration, if you need to study to make sure you have infiltrating soils and all of that stuff. And then in there, they also just talk about detention design, wetland bottom design, and just some of these other features. They do a nice guideline, but a lot of it was tailored more to the Crystal Lake watershed, and the ordinance does reference if there's any other parts of communities that have watershed planning, so like the Algonquin area, Brad, you guys have the green infrastructure, that would certainly apply for unincorporated areas. We would, indicate, hey, you have to follow this other watershed plan. So the SMO has that open for any area, but it specifically calls out Crystal Lake watershed because they went to that level of detail for the lake itself.
Is that manual available somewhere in this building, or where do you go to get that?
Is it online now?
Crystal Lake, it's online.
It's online.
It's online. Do you want me to send you a copy? Do you want me to send a copy? Does anybody want a copy of that PDF?
I'd like to see what it says in reference to what
Okay.
we're doing here.
I'll send out a copy to the group.
Because notice, it's
Talking about
either
just
the
email?
email urban
Yeah.
meeting or.
I'll use the, like, it'll come from Lily. You guys see those emails that
Yep.
has Lily on it? Okay. All right, I'll bring this back. I'll close discussions. Oh, what? Sorry, I'm sorry.
I just have a question because it came up here. Each year when the treasurer puts out their silent auction bidding thing, we have to go through it because we have to see if any of it has potential right of way for ourselves, IDOT or any township, and then we have to see, do we want that pulled off? And as I go through it every year, I see so many of what were designed as dry bottom detention basins, which are now just terrible growth fields, the invasive species left and right. When those are called for, a dry bottom, is it expected, stated, wanted that they be bush hogged twice a year or something? Or is it just, no, let them grow, they can fill in, silt in, grow whatever they want, then forget them, we'll lose them to taxes anyway?
No, I mean, we have maintenance requirements. They're just kind of tailored for, hey, make sure you're doing these annual inspections or biannual inspections, but we have no follow-up right now. So that ordinance, part of our push to cartograph is to use it to be able to track these BMPs, to have a way to have a public-facing portal, and then this group would have to decide, like, hey, if someone's doing detention basins in the back of someone's yard, what do we want to have them submit as kind of an annual report?
Okay.
Is it some pictures and just answering some questions to make sure that they're staying on top of it? And then Cartograph will kind of help keep track of all of that, run a
Thank you.
report, figure out how we're doing. And so, but no, currently it's, hey, record your maintenance plan, and that's it.
And you're done. Got it. Okay. I just thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, so this is kind of the first step I'm hoping to move us past. That's why I'm saying, there's still like for what we want to do for maintenance, I want to make it easy for staff to be able to review, and I want to make it easy for someone to be able to implement that. So if, generating some checklists and things, if you're doing this BMP, I think we want to do that. But obviously, I want to get this established first.
The idea is to have a system that makes it easy for the HOAs or whoever the entity is to know how to do it, even if people change hands over time. It's hard to expect somebody who, goes into a HOA that's been defunct for 20 years and know exactly how to do things. So we want to make it as easy as possible, to have a system for compliance.
And this won't hit any existing ones, this will be moving forward, but on any existing ones with some of our watershed planning, and Brad has experienced a lot of this, if we're gonna fund a project to restore something, then yeah, this idea of long-term maintenance is then gonna apply to that.
Thank you.
As part of, getting things back in order, otherwise they're just gonna fall apart again,
No, that's
right?
a great point,
Yeah.
and I'm glad it's on your radar.
All right. Anybody else? Okay, let's move, okay, so we're gonna make, I'll make those changes here. If anybody has anything else that, just send it to me, email it to me. Like you said, we didn't touch on kind of those two other components, et cetera, but we'll get back to that, I guess. All right, so, what do I have next? All right, so moving into new business. So I put a schedule together for you guys for alternate dates. I highlighted the 3 that we had issues. So February was, so these highlighted dates are the new dates, and I just put that basically they were the second Tuesday, so we moved them to the third Thursday. So February is the DECI program, that was an issue. Scott brought up in March, the, thank you, AFSM, which a lot of you attend, most of us attend. And then in November was President's Day, a holiday. We ended up hitting that holiday somehow, so.
Veterans Day.
Thank you, thank you, gentlemen. So those were the change. I went to my admin staff that does all the rooms, so those third Tuesdays would be available if you guys are open to that. If we can't work out a date for any of these, then we can potentially just cancel it if needed, if it's gonna be an issue, we can't get a quorum. But I'm seeing a lot of head shakes, so I don't know if you guys want to entertain, if someone wants to enter a motion to accept.
I move to accept.
No, second, I think it's good.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. All right. Okay. Oh man, this one's gonna run long. All right, 7.2. Well, let me give you guys a little bit of background. I want you to focus on the agenda. I want you to focus, it's gonna be it starts on page 10 of the agenda. So it's it's under D, number XI, item D. If an off-site outfall is required to be constructed and the downstream property owners refuse to grant access across his or her property and construction within a right-of-way or alternate route is not feasible or reasonable, the applicant shall provide the enforcement officer a 2-year post-development security for the engineer's estimate of probable construction cost for the off-site outfall plus a 10% contingency. If the downstream owner has not granted access for construction of the improvements within 2 years following completion of the development, the enforcement officer shall release the security. Here's the background on that, guys. I think some of you are involved with that. The idea is if you're putting in a detention basin along someone's property, now you're concentrating that and you're doing concentrated release to that point. So it's those low flow storm events that are potentially going to contribute to flooding right in that area. So the idea is to put something in, a drain tile, a swale, something to get it through that person's property or properties if it's multiple, in a way that limits the risk to damage from any type of
Can
flood.
you repeat where that is located?
Sorry, page 10 of your packet.
So I was very heavily involved in the last time this was written by Joanna, and very upset when she got done writing it, because she said the same thing it said before, and we were asking for changes.
Okay.
And we actually met with Jody. We had Joanna sit down with us and meet with Jody from Kane County, their stormwater person. And I want to go right back to the top of this thing. That water should not be put in a drain tile unless it has been engineered that tile can handle that water.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so there is the analysis for that as well. So even if there's an existing swale, to your point, Dan, or an existing drain tile, there has to be an analysis that downstream feature has capacity as well. So yes.
I want these detention ponds, they got no business dumping water on the neighbors, and we've got blatant, just terrible things that have happened in the Huntley area because of this. Destroying farms that are next to them with gullies that have been cut through them with this water discharge. And what Kane County has done is, in new development, they're making them take their water to the nearest outlet, just like we do in the ag community. We put tile in to carry that water. So, we have a major investment there, which brings me to the fact of just letting them come and hook into our tiles. When you got a drainage district, you got people who can sit down and have that discussion. When you're one farmer, you've got lawyers sitting on the other side of the table telling you, well, how much you want to fight this? How many lawyers you want to go get to fight us? That's not right.
Sure.
I would like to see this written where the water is carried, they carry their own water to the nearest outlet.
So,
Unless they want to work with me and say,
Right, that's-
we'll put in a bigger tile.
so just to elaborate on that and why this has come up as an issue. So that's exactly what the idea is. The upstream owner needs to work with the downstream owner. The downstream owner can say yes or no to the improvements. The risk here is that you potentially have a downstream owner that stops development just based on, whatever reasoning that they might want. So the idea is to have a way for that development to continue to move forward. The old way was, well, this is how the drainage pattern flows, water goes high to low, I'm gonna be discharging at my low spot like I was before. The difference now is you have concentrated flows, so the upstream owner needs to work with that downstream owner to provide a solution to that. What we've run into is a downstream owner that doesn't want the improvements and an upstream owner that wanted to come in for security. The language is not written in a way that helps determine what type of security that is. The person wanted to do a bond. We don't feel a bond works for that type of situation. They don't want to do a letter of credit because they potentially don't want to put up the capital and all that's involved with that, but the language doesn't say that, so they're pushing back on us a little bit, saying, well, it just says security. And then on top of that, they're producing a document from the downstream owner saying, hey, I don't care, just go ahead and do the improvements. And we're sitting here telling the upstream owner, sorry, that's not good enough. You have to put up the letter of credit for us to issue a permit, or you have to get the downstream owner to agree to the improvements, which they don't want to do. That's essentially what we've come up against. Al has been specifically involved in this project, so he can attest to a lot of the issues to that. And so I'm bringing this back for discussion to kind of figure out, number one, and also it doesn't specify when the 2-year period begins.
The biggest problem that the landowner had adjacent to us, his attorney said, you're not given an easement for this potential pipe or to utilize existing drain tile pipe, which had capacity. So when it got to the attorney, his attorney, no way in hell you're gonna let this happen.
So one of the things to also think about is, in this case, it would have just been one property owner. We could come across 2 or 3.
Oh, right.
What if the
I
middle
have
guy?
those issues too.
What if the middle guy says no to those improvements? Then the engineer potentially has to find a workaround where they take the outfall through the first property that said yes, it outlets normally because that person didn't want anything, and then put something in place on the downstream end. That could potentially happen. The problem we have with the way that the security language is written is it's meant to give that owner an ability to say yes to it, not waive their rights to those improvements, but it doesn't provide enough of detail for us to be able to carry that out, because the 2-year period is going to start at the end of construction of those improvements. If that person pulls that permit and they don't start construction within 6 months, and then funding dries up and they don't move forward with those improvements, then when that 2-year period, if you started at permit issuance of the upstream neighbor, they get delayed, it's a 3-year permit potentially, then that 2-year period might run dry. That's where the bond gets difficult, because the bond, and Ernest,
You have to
deal with
cash
it.
them. That's the problem.
Well, then it's
And-
specific
And
to
you
the
cash the
permit, right?
first one, and not only are you the bad guy, but you scare everyone.
Yeah,
It was a year after I started there was actually a developer who did not complete their entrance. And we went to the bank and we cashed their bond. And there was screaming and yelling. We said, we don't care. We went to the contractor that had been working and said, okay, here are the point, there's the checklist, go through it, let's finish all this. You will be paid by county from this bond fund. And then the remainder was returned to the developer. And everybody since then, oh my God, did they meet the time frame? But it's that first one, you can't just ask for it, you then have to hold to it and do it. And that's the tough part, not asking for it.
Well, and the problem that we have is it's potentially tied to a future permit that doesn't exist. That's the difficulty with what the state's attorney has told us, is the bonds have a lot of protections put in place, and not a lot of the details for that downstream permit are, because the person has a 2-year time frame, so they're gonna have to pull that permit. And the way this is written is, I hold the security, but the downstream owner does the work and I reimburse him. That's not clear in here. None of that was clear to me when I started down this path, and I've only since found out. So to your point, Dan, the conversations with Kane County will actually go in and do the work, which is really different from us. So I don't know if that came across in those initial discussions, but with my discussions with them now, if they hold the bond, they're gonna go in and do that downstream work as well. Which means that me as the county, if I'm gonna do that, I have a lot of liability and I need additional easements. And to Al's point, no one really wants an easement, or at least, they're less open to it. So now it's like, hey, give the county an easement to come in and do this work. I don't know that the commission is on board with that type of idea. So that's why this whole idea with the security, maybe we want to revisit it and move it more towards a hearing for that downstream neighbor to either say, yes, I want improvements, then that upstream neighbor needs to work with them to come to an agreement, or like the situation we have, the downstream neighbor, I'm good, I don't care, they can build their thing, let's move forward. So that's kind of the idea behind the discussion for this piece. And I know we're gonna run out of time, and some of you weren't involved with that. But to your point, it was put in there to protect the downstream neighbor, which I think is important. So we should have something, I just don't know that it should exist in the way that it does now. And maybe that downstream neighbor or owner is given that opportunity to say yes or no. And then we can move forward with the permitting process, and it kind of relieves the county of having to go through. Because if we do the security, our intent is to move it towards specifically to say letter of credit. You have to do a letter of credit to allow us to pull money when they're doing construction and pay off and all of that stuff. So that's just what we're dealing with. And currently for this issue, I don't know what that owner's going to decide, and in our back pocket, we might actually have to give them a variance to this procedure. Yes?
Stoyan, I read through, and I don't even know what our time frame. Maybe we're already past it for all I know.
Well, I'm trying to keep 11:30 for you guys to our commitment, and if anybody ever needs to go, feel free, but I'm mindful that you guys are volunteering for this, so I don't want, if you guys want to stay extra, I'm here anyway.
I would like to have Tyler here before we go any farther with this thing, because we spent time going over this. We had our own, and maybe that could be beneficial here, our own verbiage that we wanted done here that wasn't.
Well, Dan, let me ask you this, though. Was having this security component part of that? Because I don't think anyone in here disagrees.
Well, that's what Joanna added into it.
Right, but I'm just, and the group can clarify here, or any members can clarify. I don't think anyone disagrees that there should be a downstream improvement to have the water go from point A to point B in a way that reduces the potential risks of any flooding or anything like that. I think we're in agreement here. And we can massage that language. I think the main point I want to throw out there is I'd rather move it to some kind of hearing to, where essentially what would happen in that scenario, okay, is if I have a downstream neighbor that says, hey, I'm good with it, all right, in that hearing, staff would still need to produce a summary to the commission to say, okay, here's the design, here's maybe the potential risks, here's what we're looking at, this downstream neighbor has said no. If they're not aware, like that staff report might say, hey, there's a high risk, even though the downstream owner is saying no to it, I don't know what's gonna happen.
No
At
to,
least-
no to hooking up to it? or-
No, yeah, like, hey, I don't, there's nothing before, there's a high risk of flooding, there needs to be some improvements, and the downstream owner just says, no, I don't want it.
That was my question, I don't want what? I don't want them to...
Any improvements through my land to help,
Improvements through
to help
that.
carry the water from
Gotcha,
point A to
okay.
point B,
Yep.
so that it doesn't have any issues.
So-
If they say no to that, like, that whole process, we want to give the downstream owner an ability to say yes or no to it, because some people might not want to, but move it away from a potential 2-year security or a letter of credit, and potentially have a hearing.
So the hearing is in front of your Stormwater Management Commission? So it's like,
Yeah.
it's during so it's a public hearing?
It's a public hearing.
Gotcha.
So you're talking about the first owner, so what do you do about the 2 or 3 or 6 that are after the first one? That
Well-
don't want that water carving through their middle of their property?
Exactly, that's part of the discussion. I don't know what happens in that scenario if you've got a patchwork of yes and no's. I don't know that there's feasibly you can do some kind of project. I don't know that you can feasibly do some kind of project, right? Because the whole idea of the easement through 3-4 properties is to give everyone protection so that the middle guy, this is what I see happen all the time, is there's a new owner that comes in and says, screw this, and burns everything up. And if there isn't an easement to protect everybody else that said yes, then I might not have an ability to come in and enforce that based on the way that the ordinance is written, because maybe it's not greater than 5,000 square feet, and it might not meet the criteria for floodplain or historic floodplain or whatever it is.
Do you have a design criteria in your ordinance that requires diffuse flow designs?
Yes, yeah, diffuse flow, you have to get it underground at a certain point.
Or just
You have
have
to
a
have capacity.
Pipe with rock on top of it, so it comes out the pipe and then, yeah, level spread,
Right.
that's what I was thinking.
And that's where the downstream owner would potentially be involved. Hey, I don't want that, I'd prefer a swale.
Gotcha.
Then, the design engineer would say, okay, let's do a swale or whatever it is. Yes, Ernest?
I went through this, and I have about 1 million comments. I'm not even gonna make my comments. I'm gonna go 50,000 foot here. One, yeah, they're gonna have one comment, no. I had to address this about 5 years ago, because the subdivision next door to here, and their attorney came in, they were having issues, because the farm to the north of you guys, where you see that big open area that's kind of
Yeah.
growing cattails, is a busted field tile. And their attorney, they came to us because they found out, the original drain tile maps were written by the county engineer.
Yeah.
So it must be the place to go. And I said, well, you're at the wrong place. County engineer did lay those out, and then they set up drain tile districts. And I said, if a drain tile district exists, that's who you need to talk to and work with, but it is on private property. And as we went through it, I did some more research at the request of the department. They said, well, is there anything more we can find? Now, if you take the drainage district we're in, and I made these copies for you, okay?
Oh, thank
If
you.
you look at these things,
I'm excited.
You've got no choice but to be excited.
remember, you're here all day. So I'm here all day too, so I gotta be excited. Anyway, as I started going through all these things,
Yeah.
most of these were done, it was done with a subjective purpose. Most of these go to a road. I mean, the county engineer was also trying to create an area to take road drainage, because he was picking up a crappy system. His whole, the thing that got them in was, let's get Illinois out of the mud, because that's exactly what our roadways were. As you look at these, there are innuendos, and the court cases that got filed that had to go through, there is an easement for the mains. Now, the only place I've ever tracked it, if you go up 47, there's that subdivision called Justice Hill, and right at the beginning of it is a big pond. In that pond, when they platted it, they platted that there is a 33-foot drainage easement to the Greenwood Drainage District. And they noted it on the plat, and that's what they ripped up in order to build that pond. So, a couple of things. To say tie into a drain tile, that's a little nebulous, because what was depicted on these things are the mains, not every finger.
Sure.
So, I think it should be tie into a main, okay, number one. Number two, and this is where Tyler, the attorney, who's an expert on it, would be of use. If there are already, as a 33-foot drainage easement, one should look at two things. The drain tile that's in there is over 100 years old. Now, I'm going to tell you, when you say, oh, correct analysis, having worked under a structural and a professional engineer on the private side, nobody's got radar, X-ray vision, Superman's gone. So there'd be no way to make a 1,000% positive statement. So one thought was, maybe what should be said is, okay, there is an easement there to induce an owner, say, look, I need to get to that easement that exists. And I'm postulating, as I said, I need Tyler to confirm there are easements. I believe there are, based on what I've found. But, okay, I need to get 200 feet into your property to get to that easement. And the landowner's already shaking their head no. And as you do this, you say, I will make you a deal. In that 33-foot easement, where I intercept, I will not only bury a new line for you, so I will make a new drain tile, so it is 21st century, not 19th century or 20th century, and alongside it, in the same 33-foot easement, I will put mine straight out to the same discharge channel. So, in the case of this...
Or you can compromise, which
Or you could do one, you
find
could
more
do
people
one,
that
you
are
could
willing
do
to
one.
compromise.
That's fine.
Let's put a bigger tile in.
You could.
I'll
you
pay
could.
this much, you're gonna pay that much.
So let's,
That'd be
But the point is, that could be fixed. If someone would be able to get to it and run the drain tile through, sure, you could fix it. And when the attorney said, what would that cost? And I said, with no active drainage district here right now, I said, a small fortune, that's all I can tell you. I got nothing more for you.
well, we made that offer to that downstream owner. and they
Understood.
said no. Well, everything you guys are saying, we literally went through that whole process
And-
only to get to
And here's the kicker.
situation.
Who was who was the downstream owner? Tell me, was it a farmer, was it a developer, was it a investor? Who?
A farmer.
You're kidding me.
No, he was all good until he talked to his attorney.
There is also, the drainage law allowed for an eminent domain. So there is a way to, if somebody says, no, hell no, if it's for the good of all, you can, now,
The state's
eminent
attorney
domain
has-
is a 2 to
has
3 year
said yes to
process.
that. Well, the state's attorney has told us that for some of these older drain tiles,
Yeah.
individuals can get access,
That's
it's
right.
just not through our help,
Right.
which becomes a civil matter. So but again, the idea of the easements is just to provide that long-term protection that would allow us to get involved if someone comes in and messes it up, and that those other owners that are effective maybe don't have the funding to go pursue legal means under the drainage law.
We shouldn't have to.
Well, and to be honest, that's the one thing that you know, I have to tell people sometimes, like, sorry, I can't help you, you're on your own. I don't have protections. You have protections, but it's under state law. I can't do anything about that. So, but no, everything you said, yes, I think we did that for a 6-month process.
Oh, I think
We
it was
went
a
through
year.
it. I don't even know, everything, we looked at every which way, we got to the whole security component. The owner didn't want, I think they're actually now gonna do the letter of credit just from a timing perspective. I mentioned the discussion of a potential variance, that you have 2 owners agreeing on, I don't wanna do this. Who's the county to come in and be like, sorry, you're putting it in? So that's why we're trying to move away from the requirement of having security, potentially having a hearing, where in the hearing, much like a conditional use, those conditions can be added on. So Dan, to your point, that downstream owner can say, well, I want the improvements, but I would prefer to have a separate pipe, right? And then.
Or a larger.
Or a
larger diameter
whatever it
pipe.
happens
Either
to
way.
be.
Dedicated.
Now, from that perspective, the accountant to the engineer might say, well, 8-inch has plenty of capacity, they're asking for a 12-inch, we feel like that's just an overreach. And that public hearing is an opportunity for, like, to me, it gets political at that point, where I'm like, I don't want to be in the middle of these two people fighting. I'd rather have an opportunity for them to hash it out. It gets put into, much like a conditional use, you have the conditions of these permits. Those get put in. Everybody walks away with an understanding of what's going to happen. You don't have to worry about a bond or a 2-year period or anything. It all gets dealt with right then and there. That's kind of what we were looking to have you guys discuss on this topic. And then, obviously, a whole lot of this language is going to need to get cleaned up because of that.
Another thing that's in here, just so you know, there's a note made that, well, there could be a discharge into a roadside ditch. And I know county and township say no, and I know IDOT says no, and I know Tollway says no, so that doesn't work. Because the only thing roadside ditches are sized for is for the anticipated 30-year event of the water coming off the roads and what's coming down, so.
You would need to say yes to it. So it's like Oregonics, where we worked with you and you guys agreed.
Understood, we conveyed it to a point, but very small point, and they had to improve, so.
Right, they
just
had to make
okay.
improvements.
Yeah, just like,
Yeah.
by the way,
So it doesn't-
you now owe $2, because you said it twice over at our Oregonics jar at the MCDOT. Anybody says that word, we gotta put that money in.
Yeah, so when you're going to right-of-way or some kind of other jurisdiction, they would need to sign off on that. So that applicant, just like they came to work with you on that and what the improvements look like,
Right.
it would be part of those requirements. It's part of having capacity and everything. So, yes.
Would there be any way, any long-term maintenance, I'm thinking like 5 years after, say we have another drought, and then that drain tile plugs up with tree roots? If that outlet happens to be in that downstream landowner,
Well, that's
all
what.
that responsibility is gonna fall on him to repair that.
Well, that's where those kind of things would get worked out as part of the long-term maintenance that's recorded. Who's responsible? If that downstream owner says, screw it, I'm not doing it, and now it's affecting your property and you want to get in there, but we never put the easement in, what are you gonna, now, like I said, it's like, well, Bruce, sorry, you gotta go the civil route. When we could have easily been there to put those protections in place for you with the easement. And that was one of the sticky points, though. Hey, I don't want an easement on my property, and if I want to sell it later. And we tried to convey the message that, look, you can always revise that easement. You can change how that flows through the property for a future owner, et cetera. I mean, they have to understand they're building next to a detention basin. They're probably going to want a way to convey that water safely based on what they're doing. So from a common sense perspective, but still, they didn't want it, and we were faced with this situation now of the vagueness of this language, and then also just want to come back and discuss, how we want that process to look like. I would prefer to have some kind of hearing where those conditions are laid out and there's clarity moving forward on what that's going to look like.
So I think you give them the opportunity to work it out themselves first. If that doesn't happen, then you go to your hearing process.
Well, I think we'd want the hearing anyway, Dan, just because if they work it out and they're both in agreement that they're not gonna do the downstream improvements, we'd want that clarified at the hearing so that then that's kind of the official, documented response, because we're in a situation where we told our upstream neighbor currently, he's in agreement right now, and in order, if you don't want to do the security, which we have to, the state's attorney looked at it, it's like, in order to issue a permit, the SMO says we have to. We told her, well, we can potentially go to a variance since he says no and you guys are in agreement, and we'll lay the case out in front of the commission. But if he comes to that thing, says and changes his mind.
Yeah.
So that's the problem with working it out or having something, is just what if that person changes their mind? So that public hearing basically is like a rubber stamp to say, okay, these are the conditions set moving forward. It gives us the ability to issue a permit to the upstream owner at that point. right? Or issue a permit with the idea that they have to make improvements downstream to help facilitate that drainage. So,
I got something for you to work on, Spring, before we talk about this again next time. When I was having all my issues down there in Huntley, all you guys could do with soil and water was get on about sediment running, building up on my properties. These guys that don't want to allow this water to be carried in a tile through their property, is there any ground you have where this settlement that's moving from point A down to or into the neighbor's property or to the creek, any say you got on that that forces them to accept having that tile run through their property? Based on the settlement issue and the gully that's gonna get washed through this property.
Not pre it happening.
Not what?
Not pre it happening, so not,
But if this thing is proposed, this detention pond is proposed, it hasn't happened yet. And if this downstream owner is saying, no, I'm not gonna let you put a pipe in my property, do you guys have the authority to come in and say, because of sediment issues and trying to keep clean water,
not really, because we're enforcing either issues with the Army Corps or else with the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency. So unless it's specifically written into their laws, we can't enforce it.
so I could go right back to 2 pages ago here where I talked about nutrient runoffs, that's creating that.
You're correct.
but to your point, Pat, like anyone that does improvements could potentially be impacting and not maintaining, and so, the
You
idea.
still need that language in there.
Right, but the idea behind this though is what you would be approving is a condition that you're on board with, whether it's a swale or a pipe in a detention basin and et cetera. Then the enforcement becomes, okay, number one, we have to confirm construction through as-built, right? That it was constructed properly, and then long-term maintenance. And I think what you're getting on is the long-term maintenance component of it, which, as I mentioned, currently, we don't have enforcement on, which we're looking to change and keep track of long-term to help. So that if you're having issues and you're like, hey, this guy isn't maintaining, we can go and issue a violation to say, hey, you need to maintain this. And if they say no, then they're gonna have to pay violation fees. And that's kind of our beginning stage, which we don't need an ordinance rewrite. You're just in violation of your maintenance agreement. And, if they refuse, then we basically take them to court and they're racking up violation fees to hopefully persuade them to maintain or hire someone potentially to maintain it on their behalf. So I think those are a little bit different in terms of the design. We agree with that, whether the downstream owner wants it or not. And then the long-term function of that system and to Bruce's point, who's responsible for maintenance? Is it the upstream owner? Is it the downstream owner? Can the upstream owner then access the downstream owner's property because they're just refusing? And as you know, although we have a way to put them in violation, that's potentially a 4-month window where they decide, screw it, I'm just gonna pay the fine. And, then we ramp up the fine slowly to that effect. And next thing you know, by the time they're on board, it's a year later, which that might be critical, like, screw it, I can do it right now, I want the access, and you would have the ability to do that while we go through that process. So it's not a perfect world, but these are the type of things we're looking to put in place to help people and have those protections. So.
One other thing, Stan, and
Yeah.
I only suggest this because we have 4 different certificates that have to go on the given plat, whatever type it is, plat of dedication, plat of highway, plat of subdivision, plat of whatever.
Right.
And all of those had to be drafted, reviewed by state's attorney, and back and forth 4 or 5 times to get them. If I understand on page 10, your small Roman numeral 9, it says, "The enforcement officer may approve the connection." If that's going to be any type of certificate on a plat or something, you may want to start drafting that verbiage. Because it takes a long time to go back and forth to where it says, who it is, what it is, entity, authority. So just a suggestion.
No, well, I appreciate it, probably should have had my security language figured out before.
Yeah,
this.
because I was going to say, this is,
But,
you
you know.
they want to put that stuff together, it's a toughie.
Well, and to be honest, when I read that, it wasn't clear who's doing the work, when the 2 years began.
I understand.
So that's what,
That verbiage
you
should
know,
be up here.
I hear you.
came behind all this. So I think, I guess, we'll rewrite this section. I just don't know how do we write it now because of some of the input that we've gotten. But do you guys favor having a process where it's more of a public hearing, where you can hash out the conditions, the upstream owner can say yes or no, they can work that out, that can be incorporated. And if the downstream owner says no, we can issue the upstream owner the permit, and that way it's, official and kind of provides what the intent is of providing protections. The only thing is, I don't know how it's going to potentially work if you've got multiple properties and the middle one says no.
Exactly, and that exists everywhere.
So, maybe something we can think about and staff can think about and maybe put something together for you guys to react to.
So Kane County's doing this now of some nature. I would be curious to know, through a short meeting with a few people, okay, what are you guys doing? How are you handling the easement thing? Because that's a big sticking point. All these McHenry County attorneys, you're not going to give an easement for this.
Yeah.
Jody's very good to have these conversations.
Oh, absolutely.
I've talked to them, they basically are gonna do the work themselves. So they're keeping the 2-year guarantee and everything, but because they're doing the work themselves, then everything is on their end, their own contractors, et cetera. So when they do the security or the bond, it's much easier to pull off, whereas currently we don't have that, and I don't think there's an appetite for the county to go in and do any work.
And one other thing, if you look into doing that, Stoyan, and you don't have the appetite, but remember, you have to note how the easement's written. Because as an example, the old easements, as best I understand, the highway department is allowed to go on it, and the drainage district, and that's it. So I, as John Q. Public, can't go walk that 33-foot strip and say, there's an easement, because it ain't for me. So watch how the easements get written.
Yeah, absolutely, and like I said, that's part of it, who's allowed, who's gonna do the maintenance, all of that information. But again, that's happening with the understanding that the downstream improvements are gonna move forward, right? So I just want to discuss the process of, that's how Kane County does it, Al. I talked to them. I was like, oh, you guys are gonna do the work yourself, and they said yes. So that's why pulling the security, having them hold it so they can pull the money for the work, that all makes sense. As I understand it, as Chairman Kearns put it to me, the intent of the way that this was written was to have us hold it, but it would be up to the downstream owner to do the improvements, and then we would be reimbursing them, which is a very tricky way, and if you're doing it with a bond, there's probably a lot of legal ways the bond company can get out of that situation. With a letter of credit, it works a little bit better, but it's still, it's made the state's attorney really uneasy
The only
for being able to, if we come to it and need to pull the money, for our ability to be able to pull that money.
The only trick that would help as far as other downstreams, downstream property owners, if the easement could be gotten through the first, and if it gets to one of these existing 33-foot mains, then the other ones can be upset, but there's an existing easement. That's the only thing that could help. Now, granted, these things were laid out when there were very few property owners along a strip. I mean, people owned 140, 160, 200 acres. Now people own much smaller. So you might not be able to get to the main getting only one property owner. The other thing, on your page 10, in your number 8, you say the applicant shall notify any drainage district. That works if you have an active drainage district.
Right.
That doesn't work if you have Greenwood, which is currently inactive. So that's not always possible to do.
Yeah, it's just thrown in there in case you fall within one of those areas and the idea of them getting reactivated, et cetera. But
That was language we
So-
wanted.
all right, well, let's do this. I will, I was gonna bring this to MCSC anyway, I just wanted to get TAC feedback. We'll look at rewriting this and give you guys something to react to. I feel like you guys are really good at reacting stuff and giving me a lot of feedback, so I'll push something and get you guys to give more. But I think it seemed like having a process in place where the upstream neighbor can work with the downstream neighbor and they say yes or no and move that forward seems to be the idea. Okay.
Stan, I know it's really going to depress you, but my two neighbors here would like to steal the paperwork I brought for you. Is it going to crush you if I let them have the
No, I
paperwork?
don't need, you can get this online, that's no problem.
I know you
Yes,
can.
you can give it to Mike
You can have
directly.
it. You can go to the interactive website.
You can give them a.
Yes, you can, but you can't get this.
It's
So
it's
keep that.
11,
That
it's
is what you
11:30, and we have the Wetland Restoration Fund that I wanted to discuss. It's kind of an important element. If anybody needs to go, I obviously understand. I don't think this is gonna take a lot of time, but just wanted to run through that with you guys and what Scott has put together. So,
If we can discuss this real quick, then we'll talk to the MCSC and then bring a document back to you to actually review and approve of. But we really need to discuss this quickly so that we have something to present to the MCSC.
So, I've got Exhibit A on the screen behind me. It's just we're gonna run through this a little bit quickly, but the big key elements here is to drive no net loss for wetlands, to have wetland mitigation alternatives in watersheds for areas that have Army Corps approved wetland mitigation banks. So if you're a private bank and you're not accredited by the Army Corps, you would not fall under this criteria, so you wouldn't be able to use that bank. And then maintaining or enhancing the natural systems to reduce flood damage and help improve water quality. So the main change is we are going to 3, and there's the map, and I'll pull that up, but, and sorry, this Piscataquis Creek we're gonna combine with Rush Creek, but we're looking to go to 3 main wetland fund areas, so.
Right now, there are just 2, so the Fox River and the Kishwaukee River. And we really want to have the opportunity to provide the replacement of the lost functions of the wetlands that are being impacted as close to the source as possible. So the idea would be we would have Nipperson Creek, the Fox River, and Kishwaukee River watersheds. So we'd have 3 different wetland restoration funds that could be paid into. And you can only use the wetland restoration funds if there's not an Army Corps approved bank in that watershed. So we're just expanding the number of watersheds by 1 so that the impacts are actually being replaced as closely as possible.
So you're splitting Fox into Fox and Nippersink? Is that what the?
And
Yeah.
Kishwaukee.
Well, so
It was
right now,
already split.
the Fox and the Nippersink are combined. So the Nippersink would be a separate watershed, and that way, if there's an impact in the southeast corner of the Fox River watershed, that's being replaced in the Fox River watershed, and vice versa.
And the current wetland restoration fund is a little confusing because it talks about the 2 funds, but then it gives you a map with basically 5 different watersheds. So we're looking to clean it up. So in the old one had 2 funds. Within those 5 watersheds, those 5 watersheds belong to one of the 2 funds. In this case, we simplified it so the table that's at the end for the new numbers. Again, right now we have Kishwaukee and Piscataquis, but that's going to become 1. You can see based on our values and analysis, it's roughly the same price anyway. So it just made sense to, from an area perspective, we might not get a lot of projects in that upper Piscataquis area, so we wanted to incorporate it into a larger area to potentially have funding available. But Scott worked through these estimates with the help of Brad and some other members, MCCD, to get some restoration cost values, and then our land cost values are just coming from from averages essentially, and then we're using the federal inflation calculator to just bring those up, and we can do that on an annual basis or biannual basis, but
Right now, private wetland banks are about 120,000 an acre. And our mitigation funds are as low as,
well, 108, 107 for that Kishwaukee, and we're okay with coming under, it's just reflective of some of those areas in the land values.
well, I'm saying the way the numbers are in our current.
Oh, the current, yeah, so this is, so the
is
top
as low
one
as-
is the current one that you guys see, which has the original 6, and then, you know, we condense it into the 4, so you guys can see those numbers, where we were at compared to where we want to be. So that's the update essentially. The two main things, some of this language is getting cleaned up. We're moving to 3 funds, and the fees are getting updated here.
Who's in charge of these funds?
The county,
You're collecting the money.
we collect the money. Yeah.
And so when it gets, the way it's written, and I think we keep it the same way, is once the funds get up to $75,000, we can put out for an RFP, and then people that would like to use that money to create or restore wetlands can apply for the funds, and it's a competitive process. And we have a subcommittee here in the TAC that reviews the applications, and then it gets voted on by the MCSC, which projects would be funded. And so they would be the same thing. When it gets up to $75,000, we can vote to release those funds and put out a request for proposals. But it would be for $75,000 in the Kishwaukee River watershed, the Nippersink Creek watershed, or the Fox River watershed. And so it's pretty consistent with what the process that we have now. It's just clarifying language and then having it for 3 different wetland restoration funds.
We did it once, just so you know, that I'm aware of. And it
Twice.
worked. Twice, and it did work. It did, I was only aware of the one, I apologize. But it worked very well.
So are you using these numbers that are down in this yellow box now?
Yeah, the yellow box would be the the revised numbers for.
And we may change those. You know, what we did is we combined the watersheds and then averaged the cost from the 2010 cost, and then used the multiplier to take it from 2010 values to 2024. We may get refined numbers from the either the GIS department or the assessor's office.
Yeah.
But this is the general idea, is that we'd have a cost for the average land cost in the watershed, apply the amount of money it would cost to restore the wetlands. The number I used came from the village of Algonquin. They provided an estimate of what their costs are to restore wetlands. And so we're trying to bring it up to date and also have it be comparable to wetland mitigation banks. Our intent is not to undermine the private sector or the others who have created banks, but there really isn't that competition anyway, because you can only pay into wetland restoration funds if there is no approved, Army Corps approved bank in the watershed. Right now,
Use that first then.
Right,
Right.
yeah, because the idea is if people are coming in and making an investment from outside to establish a bank that would be accredited through U.S. Army Corps, we'd rather see those people use that bank first, and then we'd collect money beyond that to then send out a request for proposals for that watershed. And you know, we have an extensive matrix after that to try, you know, that uses certain scoring methods and trying to make sure that, you know, if the impact is in one end of the county, that, you know, we try to avoid saying yes to a project that's like completely the other side where, you know, the benefits are lost completely. So
there's a matrix that we created
Yeah.
to evaluate the merits of each project that's being submitted to the county for funding.
Are these numbers comparative to their numbers? in one of these projects?
Yeah, so like an Army Corps bank, currently, I think we have two. I think they're roughly 120, 130,000 is the rough number. Again, that's rough, and we can provide a lot of those statistics.
So, and we may come up with somewhat different numbers, but this is the general methodology. Like I said, we'll present this to the MCSC, then we'll refine it, and then at our next TAP meeting, we'll provide you with more concrete.
I think like a finalized version.
Right.
So
we're not looking for a vote now, but we just want people to understand the approach and see if there are comments or suggestions.
Well, I think the numbers are pretty high.
No, they're actually pretty realistic. I know it doesn't look like it to
See,
you.
on land you can't do anything with for that kind of money?
I understand.
Well, part of this too is, you know, to try to encourage better designs, to not, you know, wipe out wetlands and use them, because a lot of the times, the idea of trying to restore a wetland or rebuild a wetland it's not as easy. And you're not also getting it potentially in the same small watershed. So a lot of the benefits from water quality, flood storage, and things like that a community might lose, just because we have the funding and we approve a project that might be similar, doesn't mean that we're getting an apples to apples. Like, yes, we're you know, getting the same benefits. So that should be an important part to this, that you know, we're not purposefully, and I think you see that from a lot of the Army Corps banks that are in the same, you know, the Lake County, similar numbers. You know, we don't want to make it easy for people to just come in and redevelop wetland areas.
Just a couple of real quick comments. On page 13, you
Yes.
have your number 7 that says, if you can't do something in 5 years, you'll buy into a wetland, a mitigation bank.
So that's, yeah, if we put out for RFPs and nobody takes it, and the money sits in the account for 5 years after that.
You may want to revitalize that for this reason. The 2 banks you list, right now they have none available.
Right.
We bought them all out for future projects.
Okay, so
right now, you went there, that is 0. That's where they're all waiting. Daryl Kuntz from our office sat with all of us and said, well, are we just going to keep having to do this as we do bridges? And we were like, yeah. And he said, well then, hell, we're buying them in the future. So we bought future shares and we own them all.
Well,
So
in
therefore,
the case
it's
of
not you.
someone becoming available, that's what it's there for.
Well, there is a second
You know.
phase that MCCD is trying to
Right,
get through
right.
at School Hill. So, and that one, and I checked yesterday, as far as I understand, it is not yet finalized. So you can't buy into phase 2. So if you put that in 5 years pass and you can't do it, you can't buy. So I'd watch that language. You may want to find something else. Give it to some good thing, or I don't know.
Well,
Like that houses,
I think it
or-
would just stay there and then just keep going if there's no bank available.
Just don't get stuck on a technicality, like you gotta do it in 5 years and someone's sitting there.
Because the whole point is to maintain no net loss, so it would have to be done, something.
Something has to be done.
Yeah.
Something
Good,
has-
good point, though, and I was not aware that
That's
you
when-
were
that's when-
regarding the.
That's when Scott turns the entire north area behind here, that's a basin that I check every year for NPDS, into a huge rain garden. That's what the money goes for.
Bank.
There you go, that's what the money goes for.
So is there any questions or comments? Everybody feel comfortable with the approach? Okay, we will have something more
We're
tangible
gonna
next
bring it
time.
back. It's gonna be more in a final version, and, you know, we'll get more feedback, but yeah, that was the intent of this exercise, was to get any feedback now, put it to MCSC, bring it back to you guys one last time for a final look over.
Yep.
For them to then be able to approve towards March is kind of our goal.
So, thank you. It was important from a timing perspective to have a chance to talk to you about that, so thanks for quickly reviewing that.
All right, with that, I'll close the discussion on the Wetland Restoration Fund. There's no staff reports, don't have any announcements, no future topics. Anyone, yes? One future-
Reactivating drainage districts for reasons that we were just talking about earlier.
So you, reactivating them, just a discussion on that?
Yeah, and I'm trying to make it happen in a timely and feasible manner.
Well, so I guess from a county perspective, I don't know what our role would be in that. Is that kind of, what kind of the role, because I don't know, like, we don't play a role in that.
Well, somehow you are, because we're trying to get away from the 40, is it 42 or 40?
43.
43
43.
that exist, and put them in, and make, just like you did with that watershed, put them into smaller geographic, combine them before we reactivate. To make, instead of trying to do 42, you're gonna do 25 maybe?
Well, we are looking at doing watershed planning across the county, which is going to combine watersheds, and we do want to establish groups and structure to those. Now, with that being said, we don't know that we necessarily want them to have a drainage district structure, or if the drainage districts, where available, want to lead in those specific sub-watersheds and be more active, whereas in a more urbanized watershed, they're probably not gonna want a drainage district. It might just be local municipalities that kind of lead that.
We're already at that point where some of those you're not gonna bother
Okay.
reactivating.
Yeah, I mean, if you want, that's gonna be something that we bring forward to everyone as part of our watershed discussion. So if you want, we're working on developing what those are gonna look like, and maybe when we bring that forward, we can tie in how what role the drainage districts are gonna play into that, because that is something that we do have as a topic item. And we'd like to, coordinate with drainage districts and all of that. So if it's okay with you, I'll note it, but when we're I feel like when we're closer to that point and have a map available for you, we can show you what that's gonna look like.
I can give you some insight next month, but Thursday, Friday of this week is our annual Drainage District Association meeting for the state, and that's on the agenda for Friday as a topic.
Consolidating?
Is consolidation and reactivation, so.
We would, so from our perspective as the county, we would have no issue with that. And as part of our watershed plans, if that means that the drainage district plays a more prominent role in that sub-watershed, then that's fine. And in other sub-watersheds, if those communities don't want to do that, we essentially want to have it a grassroots effort where each sub-watershed can kind of come together and figure out what the structure for them that's going to work best is.
Because some of these are so small, especially
Absolutely.
over on the eastern side of the county, that you want to get them all together. But then you also have to be careful, and you get the wrong people, you're not moving nothing.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
So you have local people representing those drainage districts. And I guess
Well,
my
any
issue was-
stakeholders.
Right,
Yeah.
and what going was like your situation with the farmer who didn't want to allow this. Well, the drainage district has the common sense to know that it's better to carry that
He knows
water
too, it's just the attorney.
under the ground. So some of those issues could be resolved with active drainage districts.
Well, and to your point, some of this is going to, we're looking to fund future projects in these sub-watersheds. So we're not going to potentially do studies in areas where we don't have active participation from stakeholders, or if they don't want us. So a big player in that might be a drainage district, it might be MCCD, could be a couple of municipalities. It just depends. That's the reason why we're going this route, so everybody has an ability to structure it to their needs, understanding the eastern side of the county is different than the western side.
And to clarify, the county's not going to be giving funding out. With the intent of the watershed plan is to develop a plan that will enable those communities to pursue grants. We won't be the grant.
Right, sorry if
grant
I
agency.
worded that wrong, yeah.
But the watershed plans are a powerful tool that enable groups then to pursue funding for individual projects.
But yeah, we're gonna be a part of those discussions, we're gonna be doing outreach, so there's a lot of steps. We wanna see how others have done it and, provide some blueprints. And the blueprint might be a little bit different depending on which part of the county you're in. so,
You got something, Brian?
yeah.
No, I was just curious if that was the holding out of the language from the 2050 plan.
We're having no influence from the 2050 plan
Okay.
at this point. But we understand that there's a lot of work that happened in that related to some of what we want to do that we're definitely going to look to capture, if that makes sense. So if you're bummed that one of your 2050
No,
things
I'm not bummed at any of that.
are not going
I'm just-
in, and
I'm
this
just,
isn't-
it seems consistent with the language that was used about drainage districts being part of a watershed-based group formation,
Got
so.
it. Yeah. So
So there's continuity.
we'll open that up definitely. Right now, we're in the process of kind of dotting our i's and crossing our t's with some of this and working with the Illinois State Water Survey to develop some cost estimates that we want to put forward as well, so.
Our local district and the Farm Bureau are putting on a meeting next month on the 20th at the Farm Bureau. If you really like some more information on some of it, because that will be discussed is the 20th at the Farm
Yeah,
Bureau. So
which I will be out.
Yeah,
I'll ask Adam,
But,
send me
uh,
that calendar invite so I can get it on this.
okay.
Reserve a seat.
All right, well, if there's nothing else left, I'll go ahead and entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, first